100 questions about writing in 5 minutes or less. Let's get to it. Question 9. What do you edit out of your books? Okay, this is a multi-stage process that I go through. This is just what I do. There are other things that you should probably look at that I probably won't mention. The first one is crutch words. So, it's something that I say naturally when I'm talking with other people. When you're having a conversation with someone and someone else asks you a question, you go, and think about the answers. When you're writing that dialogue, you don't have it in there, but there will be other things that you put in that you don't realise, that when you're trying to write dialogue that feels natural, that's something that you would probably put in without thinking. If the dialogue was 100% natural, you would have pauses, you would have breaks, you would have ums and ers, but we don't tend to put them in dialogue to make it 100% authentic because it'll be weird to read. So conversations flow a lot more. People say the names of characters a lot more often in dialogue, which you wouldn't normally say in real life. So those kind of things I try and pay attention to as well. So dialogue is the first thing that I focus on, and crutch words. Other kind of crutch words are kind of things that you add in without realising. It could be anyway at the end of the sentence, or so, as I said, or almost. Whatever it might be, it's something that you use often that comes in time and time again. And part of the editing process at the different stages that you'll go through will be trimming out some of this fat that doesn't need to be there. It slows things down. It loses some of the clarity. It kind of makes the story drift at times if there's too much of it. This isn't changing the whole of the story. This isn't changing your flow. This isn't changing the rhythm. It's just making it cleaner prose, which makes it easier for the reader to understand what you're trying to communicate. And that's the most important thing in your story. You don't want them stumbling over things. You don't want them tripping over difficult names or text that they don't understand because you got caught up in something. It could be used a lot of similes and metaphors. There again, I don't use them very often unless it's really important. And if you make up something like that, or something like that within your own world to make it fit, that can also be a stumbling block for some people. So I'd pay attention to those too. This next one is a little bit more difficult to do, but you should try and focus on it because it is quite important. You should edit you out of the books. Now, whether that's the way the characters speak, their dialogue shouldn't feel like yours, whether it's certain types of phrasing or patterns, whether it's particular feelings towards something. You've made up religions, you've made up races, whatever it might be. Any of your prejudices, any of your preferences, any of your likes or dislikes, any of your beliefs, any of that kind of stuff shouldn't be visible in all of the characters. When you first start writing, or when I first started writing books years ago, a lot of the characters felt like people that I knew. A lot of the way they talked sounded like me. And also the characters felt like people I'd met, or maybe famous people or characters, or whatever it might be that I've read of favourite books. And slowly you start to take away those kind of crutches where you're writing things that are familiar and you're relying purely on things that you've created. And it is dangerous, and it is scary, and it is quite terrifying. But it is important so that someone doesn't read a book and just see that basically you're preaching your beliefs. This character has become a mouthpiece for whatever you're talking about. That isn't to say you can't have themes in your book, that you can't have messages, but it shouldn't be so obvious that the first 10 pages it feels like you're just reading some kind of lecture from someone instead of having the story. The third thing to look at is cool ideas that don't go anywhere. If you're writing a series and you plant some seeds that's going to pay off later on, then great, they can be in there. But if you throw some cool stuff in there just cause, then you should look at taking that out as well. If it adds to the world and it's important to the story, then it's worth having there. But if you're putting a load of stuff in, even story threads, even characters that have little plots that never actually go anywhere, I would look at taking them out too. Because sometimes you create a whole story, a whole world, and you're building this all in your head, but you're trying to communicate something that's very specific with your story. Even with multiple points of view, I've had that in one of my other books. I had a plot line that kind of was cool and quite interesting, but on whole, when I looked at the rest of the book, it didn't fit with the theme. It was detracting from what I was trying to say with this story. The things that I was exploring was a cool aside, but it didn't really go anywhere, so that got trimmed out. And afterwards, the book felt not only leaner, but it was more focused. It gave me a bit more time to spend some more details on some of the other characters, to flesh some of them out. And the word count leveled out in the end. So it's not about making the book shorter. It's about focusing on the vision and the message that you've had for your book, the story as a whole, to make it cohesive. And this is why the editing process is so important. Having other people who've never read your book before go through it with fresh eyes and give you their perspective. And it's up to you to listen very carefully to what they're saying and then improve the book based upon their feedback.